What's happening, y'all? Welcome inside the Fantasy Stock Exchange. Bush coming at you solo today to talk about the running back starts and sits for week 11 of fantasy football. As I do every Wednesday, I go over each backfield, talk about some of the trends that we're seeing, some of the backfield splits that we're seeing, whether you should be starting, sitting, flexing some of these running backs, as well as who you should be kind of buying low and selling high on based on the usage that we're seeing. So if you guys do enjoy this video at any point, hit the like button, comment any of your thoughts down below, and subscribe to the channel if you are new. We're going to hit the intro, and then we're going to get right into this. So as I did last week, I have this matchup chart that I created. And if you guys want to see a bigger version of it, you can go over to Twitter, follow me on there at Football Stock, and you'll see a bigger version of it. I tweeted it out last night, basically. And what this is it goes over the rank and adjusted fantasy points allowed to the running back position, the rank and rush defense DVOA, and receiving fantasy points allowed, which is basically receptions plus receiving yardage and receiving touchdowns for each matchup, basically, and for each opponent, so that you know who has the good matchups and who has the bad ones. And like I said last week, I'm going to leave this right over my right shoulder here so that you guys can see it basically as I go through the entire matchups, and I don't have to keep referencing, X running back has a good matchup or a bad matchup, so on and so forth. You can kind of just look at it while I'm talking about each game and get the idea that way. So Thursday Night Football, the first game that we're going to get into this week is Patriots at Falcons. In this backfield situations, you're going to be starting Damian Harris and Cordero Patterson if they both play. Of course, their backups are going to be more valuable if they don't play. There's kind of a lot of moving parts in this game. As of right now, I'm going to start with the Patriots backfield. The Patriots backfield did have a big shakeup last week. With Harris out, Ramondre Stevenson basically carried the load to the tune of like 100-yard rushing game. And Harris is already back at practice on Tuesday. Yesterday, he was practicing. And if he plays, I'm assuming he's back to his workload. And Stevenson's merely mixed in because Harris, seems to be still the starting running back of this team. But of course, if he is out, Stevenson will be heavily involved to the tune that he was last week. If he's out again, he's probably a top 20 running back on the week. And if he does play Damian Harris, he's still a top 24 running back in his own right. The Falcons are not very good against the run, so pretty easy matchup there. But on the Falcons side of things, we did have Cordero Patterson suffer I think what was called a mid to high ankle sprain based on the reports that I saw. Was practicing in a limited capacity on Tuesday, but on a short week, I'm not expecting him probably to play in this game, which makes Mike Davis a low-end flex play. I'm sure a lot of you guys went out and picked up Wayne Gallman on your waiver wire. If you guys see the usage on the screen right now, it does look like Mike Davis was used a little bit less. He was on 30% of snaps compared to Wayne Gallman's 43%, 16% of the carries to Wayne Gallman's 60%. But what Dwayne McFarland writes in the utilization report basically is that Davis handled 40% of the snaps and 20% of the rushing attempts and was in on 56% of the dropbacks on drives 6 through 9, basically, while all other starters remained. However, Gallman remained in the game with the backups while Davis rested. So once the game got out of hand, the Cowboys were clearly kicking the shit out of the Falcons. Wayne Gallman got a good amount of his carries and his touches when the backups were out there, which is probably why his numbers are a little inflated. I think he's a good pickup, but not necessarily a guy that I'm looking to be throwing into my starting lineup immediately. If Cordero Patterson is out, I still think Mike Davis is probably the guy that you want to start in this game. And even still, he's probably like a top 30 running back. He's not a guy that I'm going to start over anybody like Damian Harris or Zach Moss or anybody like that. I'll probably start him in that like Devontae Freeman, Alex Collins type of range where you're looking at running backs there. So moving on to the 1 p.m. games, this is the Ravens at Bears. Speaking of Devontae Freeman, I think he's a decent flex option in this game. And of course, you start David Montgomery. Now, Freeman's start and flex consideration is contingent on Latavius Murray being out again, in my opinion. Le'Veon Bell was cut yesterday from the team, leaving a role for Murray to come back, which is probably an indication that he is coming back, being that they cut Le'Veon Bell. But that downgrades Freeman into RB3 territory for me because he's not a guy that gets a huge workload. And when Latavius Murray was on the field, it was more so of a split backfield, 40-40, 20 type of split, which is completely gross, of course. And then obviously you also have to compete with Lamar Jackson for carries as well. So not a guy that I'm excited about starting if Latavius Murray is back. I currently have him at 26 right now, behind a guy like Zach Moss, behind Damian Harris, behind Myles Gaskin, behind Josh Jacobs and Antonio Gibson in that order. So that's kind of what I think about Devontae Freeman. We have seen the usage there, as you guys can see on the screen, like 58% of the snaps the last 2 weeks, a good portion of the rush attempts, decent share of the routes, but the usage is only going to go so far when we're talking about a backfield like Baltimore and a player like Devontae Freeman. So That's kind of my thoughts on that. Of course, with David Montgomery, we did see some promising usage before they went on bye last week. He wasn't eased in at all on Monday night against the Steelers in week 9. He took 15 of 19 total running back opportunities, and it was a terrible game script. They got down very big early, so the running back opportunities were few and far between. But he did play 85% of the snaps and run 73% of the routes for the Bears in just his first game back from a multi-week injury, which we typically see these players get eased in a little bit. His buying window is closing right now. If you can get him for low-end RB2 prices, which is what I think his value will probably be at, the owner that has David Montgomery right now, this is a borderline RB1 rest of season, though, in terms of usage, in terms of his ability. And I think this offense, as I talked about 2 Tuesdays ago, will get better with Justin Fields getting more acclimated to the NFL. If you're nervous about a guy like Antonio Gibson or Josh Jacobs or Damian Harris or somebody like that, if you're able to flip anybody in that range to for David Montgomery in a 1-for-1 or like a 1-for-1 with maybe a little small piece on top of it in the case of like Damian Harris or Josh Jacobs, I'm absolutely willing to do that, because I think with Montgomery, you're getting a solidified back-end RB1, high-end RB2 type in the James Robinson, Leonard Fournette, Darrell Henderson type of mold. Whereas with, Josh Jacobs or Damian Harris, you're getting a touchdown or bust mid to low-end RB2, which is a pretty big difference in my opinion. So Packers at Vikings, the next game that we're going to talk about here. Both of these are pretty straightforward. In this game, you're going to be starting Dalvin Cook. Dalvin Cook is still pending his personal situation floating out around there, but he should be fine for this game. Keep Madison's stash. If you own Dalvin Cook, I have Dalvin Cook in our listener league, and I have Madison on my roster, and I'm not dropping him because of Dalvin Cook's pending legal situation based on what we've kind of seen so far. I would be willing to trade a small piece for Alexander Madison if you have Dalvin Cook and you wanted to secure that Vikings backfield in the case of Cook getting, suspended or exempt or something like that. But I think you should be all right. And then on the other side of things, of course, we have A.J. Dillon's season. Aaron Jones is expected to be out 1 to 2 weeks, probably 3, knowing that the Packers have a bye in 3 weeks from now. It's basically A.J. Dillon's season. And I really liked A.J. Dillon coming out of Boston College, so I ended up with him on a few of my dynasty rosters, and he's finally getting his opportunity. For those of you guys that haven't watched a whole lot of A.J. Dillon, I compared him to Brandon Jacobs coming out of college. He kind of has fit that role in the NFL as well. He kind of reminds me a little bit of Jordan Howard type of running back as well. Just a very, very solid running back. Going to contribute a little bit in the passing game as well with Aaron Jones out of the backfield, but not a guy that's going to be a 7 target per game type of running back. But in this matchup, this is a pretty easy game script for the Packers. They are favored in this game, and I expect A.J. Dillon to get 18, 20 carries in this one and have a good shot at the goal line as well. So A.J. Dillon, a guy that I have currently inside my top 12 running backs on the week. He's currently my RB12 exactly. So Colts at Bills, start Jonathan Taylor and flex Zach Moss, and I will actually be at this game. So on Sunday, you guys aren't going to see me on the morning show before kickoff on Sunday morning. It'll just be Danny for a bit answering some of your questions, but I'm going to be sitting midfield at this game, and I'm hoping for a big explosion out of Jonathan Taylor to give me some excitement. But JT is a stud. We all know that. We all know he is in your starting lineup. This is a very tough spot for him, though. As you guys can see above me right now, 29th in adjusted fantasy points against and 3rd in rush defense DVOA are the Buffalo Bills. This is a very tough defense in general against the pass and run, so the Colts may have a tough time moving the ball overall. Jonathan Taylor, as you guys can see, his usage is continuing to stay in the elite level. Nothing really new to report there. Moss is still the primary back in the Bills backfield, though. As we've seen all season, he's basically the byproduct of the offense. And the Bills currently have the 22nd expected fantasy points to running backs at their position right now. So they're not a team that heavily relies on their running backs. When they get down to the red zone, they're not eager to run the ball. When they are in a heavy game script where they're winning by a lot, they're not just going to run it down the opponent's throat. They're a team that likes to pass the ball. And Moss is still the most valuable running back in this backfield because of that, because he runs the most routes on the team. He gets the most targets on the team. 18% of the time he's running a route, he's getting targeted on the season so far. They have no real incentive to get the ball to Moss or Singletary for that matter. They're tertiary pieces of the offense. That is valuable, though, because of this team and how much points that they score. So my running back 25 on the week. They had one of the easiest matchups in the league last week against the Jets. So hopefully they can still continue to be relevant in this game. Not necessarily a good sign, though, that we did see Matt Breida get more and more involved last week. It wasn't, anything that we saw coming, but the Jets are just giving away points to the running back position. So this game against the Colts, probably not as enticing for the Bills running backs, and probably guys that you don't necessarily need to start if you have better options. So Lions at Browns in this game. Of course, we know that we have 2 studs, DeAndre Swift and Nick Chubb. DeAndre Swift literally saw Najee Harris usage last week. Look at this freaking work of art that I'm about to put on the screen right now. Swift is all the Lions have going for him right now. 96% of the snaps, 85% of the carries, 97% route participation, 23% target share, 100% of the short down and distance, long down and distance, and 2-minute drill snaps. He's the offense. He is locked into a top 10 running back week in and week out, even if Jamal Williams returns, because he's very good in the receiving game. He has 6 targets pretty much every game this year or more, and he's a guy that is starting to get a lot of carries now. Dan Campbell did actually take over the play calling from Anthony Lynn last week, and we saw a huge emphasis on the run. Of course, we saw DeAndre Swift get 33 carries in the first game that Dan Campbell is the play caller, and DeAndre Swift. And that game plan is very interesting too, because the Steelers had been so good against the run that the fact that they were able to do that successfully is really encouraging going forward. Now, the Browns also pretty good against the run, so I'm not sure how effective they're going to be in this game, but as soon as they start getting some easier matchups, that's great news for DeAndre Swift. Chubb, on the other hand, should be back this week after missing last week with COVID. It's really frustrating that we never saw the Dearness Johnson usage that we saw last week out of Nick Chubb. As you guys can see on the screen, Dearness Johnson saw nearly 90% of the snaps, 95% of the rush attempts, and over a 70% route participation. We have never seen Nick Chubb get that kind of usage, and Kareem Hunt does have a slight chance to play this week, but we haven't heard too much about his condition. So as of right now, I'm operating under the assumption that Nick Chubb will be the starting running back. Dearness Johnson will probably be mixed in here and there in that third down type of role, but that's pretty much how the backfield will shake out. Nick Chubb is in your starting lineup as a top 8 running back this week against a Detroit Lions run defense that is not very good. So Washington at Carolina. I talked about Antonio Gibson on Tuesday, but the encouraging thing, as I already talked about, I'll just kind of briefly go over it again. He recorded his highest snap share in weeks, a season high 26 opportunities, and a second highest in his career. And conversely, J.D. McKissic and Jarrett Patterson weren't very involved. J.D. McKissic saw his lowest snap since week 5, lowest amount of opportunities since week 5. That's exactly what we want to see out of Antonio Gibson going forward. This week does present a brutal matchup against the Carolina Panthers run defense that James Conner wasn't able to do very well against last week, did get into the end zone, but that's about it. We know Gibson is heavily involved in the red zone, though, which keeps him in that top 24 range for me as a guy that you can start this week, but it is a very bad matchup for him against Carolina, and this game script could get out of hand if Cam Newton does play very well in this one. We do expect Cam Newton to start on the Carolina side of things. But like I said, the usage was there for Antonio Gibson. Looks like he's back to his early season self, the usage that we saw from him in his rookie year and at the beginning of this year before he started dealing with all these injuries. Christian McCaffrey put everybody in cardiac arrest when he was getting his hammy worked on the sideline last week, but he should be up to even closer to his full workload this week. Even still, this is a guy that scores 20 PPR points per game without even getting into the end zone last week, which is absolutely insane. Only played 60% of the snaps, didn't even get into the end zone, and still getting 10 targets and 13 carries. So Christian McCaffrey, absolutely startable as a top 3 running back on the week, of course. Texans at Titans. I'll keep this one short and sweet. Do not start a single running back in this game. The Texans use Rex Burkhead and David Johnson and Phillip Lindsay interchangeably based on which running back is playing well. And I think this whole backfield is too big of a headache to even attempt to figure out. And the offense isn't good as it stands also. Deontay Foreman looked to be the guy to own in Tennessee last week, but he still only saw 13 opportunities. There's just no valuable role in this backfield until Derrick Henry comes back because they're using Jeremy McNichols on long down and distance, 2-minute drill snaps. They're splitting carries between Foreman and Peterson, and McNichols is getting worked into that as well. Routes are pretty much even down the middle. There's really no valuable role in this backfield, and I just don't want to start anybody from this game if I can help it. So 49ers at Jaguars, start Elijah Mitchell if he plays, and start James Robinson. Now, we know Mitchell has the number 1 running back on the San Francisco 49ers when he's been on the field, and 27 carries Sunday night is perfect proof of that. But he did sustain a broken finger on Sunday night, and that apparently needs surgery, according to Kyle Shanahan. And it's also up to doctors to see if he can play through it. But if he is out, of course, Jeff Wilson is the guy to own. If he's available in your league, he was the guy that spelled Elijah Mitchell on Sunday night. It wasn't Trey Sermon. Trey Sermon's been, sparingly involved throughout the course of the entire season. And if Elijah Mitchell were to be out, I expect Jeff Wilson to get the Elijah Mitchell workload, to get 15 plus carries per game, a couple targets here and there, and most of the goal line work. So again, Elijah Mitchell hopefully is in there for your fantasy lineups, but if he's out, I think Jeff Wilson is a startable guy as a top 25 or so running back this week. James Robinson, on the other hand, he did save his day with a touchdown this week against Indianapolis. Looks like he was eased in a bit based on his workload. You guys can see he only played 59% of the snaps when typically he's been about 60, 70% when he's been healthy and not been out with injury like he was in week 8 and week 9, of course. This matchup is a lot closer to league average than it was to the very difficult matchup that he had against Indianapolis last week, and he should be back to his full workload. So J-Rob to me is inside my top 15 running backs. No concerns about starting him this week. Dolphins at Jets, the next game that we're going to talk about here. In this game, you're going to start Myles Gaskin and you're going to start Michael Carter as well. Myles Gaskin continues to get solid usage with Malcolm Brown still on IR with an injury. The single best matchup in the NFL are the New York Jets. As you guys can see above me, they are just giving it away to running backs. We saw Nyheim Hines and Jonathan Taylor both get there 2 weeks ago. We saw all the Bills running backs, despite limited opportunity, contribute efficiently when they got their opportunities with Matt Breida, with Devin Singletary, and with Zach Moss. Gaskin is getting good usage, as you guys can see on the screen. With Malcolm Brown still out, he is a guy that I'm absolutely willing to start as a top 24 running back this week. It is a very easy matchup. I expect him to probably get into the end zone, be pretty efficient on his touches as well. So I talked about Carter on Tuesday as a sell high candidate, and I still stand by that, but it is interesting that Joe Flacco has been officially announced as the starter against Miami this week because Zach Wilson, I guess, is not 100% ready to play this week. They're going to start Joe Flacco in place of Mike White. And Carter remains a top 15 running back for me this week because he is still getting the usage, having a pretty decent matchup against the Dolphins defense that is much more forgiving against the run than the Bills defense that he played last week. And even last week, he was still able to get there on the back of the fact that he does get a lot of goal line work when they're down in the red zone. So he's a guy that I'm willing to start for sure as a top 15 running back. Saints at Eagles, the next game that we're going to talk about here. Start Alvin Kamara if he plays, Mark Ingram if he is out, and then sit all of the Eagles running backs. Now, Alvin Kamara is expected to be back. According to Nick Underhill last week, he said this is a minor injury. He's going to be out for 1 week, and then he'll be back. So I'm going to go based on that assumption that Alvin Kamara is playing. Of course, like I said, if he is out, we know when we got confirmation that Mark Ingram is a stud handcuff. As you guys can see on the screen, 85% of the snaps, 67% of the carries, 61% of the routes, decent target share, and the goal line work as well. Mark Ingram is clearly the running back to own if Alvin Kamara is out. Of course, we did already know that, but now we have some 100% confirmation. Continue to stash Mark Ingram in your leagues, 12-team leagues or whatever on your bench, because if Kamara does miss time, he's going to be very valuable. Now, the Eagles backfield, on the other hand, I'm not starting any of them because it's just a complete mess between Jordan Howard, Boston Scott, and Kenneth Gainwell. The Eagles activated Miles Sanders today. His practice window has been open, which is good news for Miles Sanders owners who've been stashing him on their IR spot or whatever. It also makes for a solid trade target for those of you guys that are 7-3, 8-2, 9-1, 10-0 or whatever. If you guys want to trade a piece that'll help somebody now for Miles Sanders, I'm trying to think off the top of my head, you could send them like a wide receiver or something for Miles Sanders and stash him on your bench, and then maybe he can become a flex play for you because the Eagles have been running a very high rate of rush attempts these past few weeks. Now, they've played some run funnel defenses like the Chargers, like the Broncos, like some other teams, but it is worth noting basically that when Miles Sanders was healthy, they weren't running the ball at all. They were passing like crazy. And if Miles Sanders comes back soon and they're running the ball a lot more than when he was out, then it could lead to a bigger workload once he's back. So he's a guy that I'm definitely willing to stash as a low end RB2, high end RB3 that you can probably use in your flex once he gets back. So Bengals at Raiders, and this is the start of the 4 p.m. games. We only have 3 on the slate this week, but Joe Mixon and Josh Jacobs are 2 guys that are absolutely in your starting lineup. Dwayne McFarland did express some concern with Mixon's usage. As you guys can see on the screen, he typically at the beginning of the season, he was like a 70, 80% snap share running back, getting everything that you wanted, long down and distance, short down and distance, inside the 5, targets, routes, whatever. Now they've kind of limited his role since his injury and since he came back from it to a 2-down running back that gets involvement in the passing game, but is not involved on 2-minute drill situations in long down and distance. They are giving that to Samaje Perine. So basically what McFarland says is that Mixon has 2 touchdowns basically in back-to-back contests, and he isn't really an every down back anymore. So if people are viewing him as an every down stud workhorse and you can trade him for a guy like DeAndre Swift, for a guy like Austin Eckler, for a guy like Saquon Barkley, for somebody in that realm, then you should go out and do it basically, because he is a short down and distance back who's going to be valuable in a pretty good offense, but he's not a guy that's going to be involved if they get into any negative game scripts and is going to get siphoned some touches here and there basically from Samaje Perine. So if he is valued as an elite running back in your league, that I would consider shopping a guy like Joe Mixon. On the other side of things, we have Josh Jacobs. We know what we're getting, a very touchdown dependent RB2 who only really excels in good matchups and good game scripts. As you guys can see on the screen, we know what Jacobs' role is by now. He gets the majority of the carries, 15 to 20 per game. gets, some involvement in terms of routes and targets, but not enough to give him a high floor necessarily. So Josh Jacobs, again, in that Damian Harris range, a little bit better than Damian Harris, I would say, because he doesn't have a Ramondre Stevenson breathing down his neck. And I just think he's a better player. So he's just ahead of him for me rest of the season and this week. To the Cowboys at Chiefs, and this one will be the chalkiest DFS game probably of the entire season so far. Start Zeke Elliott in this game. Start Darrell Williams if CEH is out. Start CEH if he plays, and you can also low-end flex Pollard in this game. So this game has a 56-point over-under. It's the highest in the most recent couple weeks. So both Cowboys backs are going to be in my lineup. We know what Zeke's role is. We know what Tony Pollard's role is by now. So I have no concern starting those guys. Clyde Edwards-Helaire, on the other hand, has been discussed as a possibility to return this week. If it were me and I was the Chiefs, it would make sense for me to rest him one more week because the Chiefs are on bye in week 12. So if I had to guess, I would say that Clyde Edwards-Helaire will be out this week, which means we get Darrell Williams in his full workload, which has been very good. Currently ranks 12th in expected PPR points over the last 3 weeks based on the workload that he has. Gets all the carries, gets all the routes, gets all the 2-minute drill and long down and distance, as well as the inside the 5 attempts in a great offense like Kansas City. So he is a guy that I'm absolutely playing as a top 20 running back if Clyde is out. Of course, if Clyde plays, we're going to have a bit more of a muddy situation on our hand. If Clyde plays, is he going to get his full workload? Is Darrell Williams still going to be involved? We really don't have any idea right now. But if Clyde plays, he's like a low-end flex play for me, and I'm sitting Darrell Williams. But hopefully Clyde is out if you have both guys. I think Darrell Williams is just in a much better situation to be the primary back. Give Clyde an extra week or two of rest because they have the bye week and, get him ready for week 13. So Cardinals at Seahawks, the last of the 4 p.m. games that we have here. Start James Conner in this game and sit Alex Collins. James Conner did see a workhorse role, and that was definitely something that I wanted to see how it played out coming into this week because we knew that Chase Edmonds was out for the next couple of weeks, but I wanted to see how much are they going to integrate Eno Benjamin into Chase Edmonds' role, or are they going to use James Conner more so in Chase Edmonds' role and just use Eno Benjamin sparingly? And that's basically what happened. 84% of the snaps, 53% of the rush attempts, and 61% of the routes. That's actually more than what I expected out of James Conner. And keep in mind, this was a terrible game script for him too. The Carolina Panthers got out to an early lead. It wasn't a good matchup on the ground for him either. And this game presents a much different situation where the Cardinals, presumably with Kyler Murray back in the lineup because he is practicing today, will be in a better game script against the Seahawks. And the Seahawks are not nearly as good against the run. In fact, they're terrible against the run comparatively to the Carolina Panthers. So James Conner to me is a top 12 running back on the week. I have him currently at running back 11. And there's guys that I would start him over that would probably shock you. I'd start him over Leonard Fournette. I would start him over Saquon Barkley. I would start him over James Robinson this week because I think he is in a great spot. And on the Seahawks side of things, doesn't sound like Chris Carson is going to return this week based on reports that we've heard. We know what Alex Collins' role is. Again, having Russell Wilson helps a little bit, but not a guy that I'm overly excited about starting, maybe as a back-end RB3, mid RB3 in the top 32 type area of my running back rankings. But again, not a guy that I'm excited about. Sunday Night Football, Steelers at Chargers. This one is pretty straightforward. Of course, you're going to be starting Najee Harris and Austin Eckler. Both guys are stud workhorses, so there's not much else to say about that. Eckler hopefully can do some damage against the Steelers defense that allowed DeAndre Swift, a similar type of running back to Austin Eckler, to do a lot of damage too. So that's good news for him. Najee Harris, of course, on the other hand, has a very good matchup against the Chargers defense that is pretty much giving it away to the running back position. Dalvin Cook didn't have a monster game last week, but we know that the Chargers have been very susceptible to running backs all season, and they've been very beatable that way. So Monday Night Football, the final game of the slate here, Giants at Buccaneers. And if we lose this game, I swear to God, I'm going to be sick about this team because we've lost to Washington and New Orleans the last 2 games. But start Leonard Fournette in this game and also start Saquon Barkley. Fournette, as I talked about on Tuesday, is a great buy low candidate. The Bucs are getting healthier on offense with Antonio Brown probably back this week. Rob Gronkowski probably back in the coming weeks, and also their defense getting healthier with Carlton Davis, their number 1 corner, potentially getting healthier. That also just helps the team in general, helps them get off the field on defense, helps their time of possession, stay on the field on offense, and that all contributes to Leonard Fournette being the primary scoring running back in a great offense, right? We know what his role is at this point, but just in case you forgot, he's like a 60% snap share guy, getting most of the carries, about 60% of those, running about 50% of the routes, getting 23% targets per route run, and of course, getting a primary workload on the goal line as well. So Leonard Fournette, definitely a guy in my lineup. If people are panicking on him, selling low on him or whatever, go out and buy him because I think he's a great acquisition right now. Now, of course, we do get Saquon back for this game. Presumably, we expected him back 2 weeks ago before the bye week. He got an extra week of rest to deal with that ankle injury. Should be back to 100% in this game. Now, we don't know if he's going to get his full workload necessarily, but I'm assuming because of the extra week of rest, the fact that he probably could have played in week 9 before the bye week, I'm expecting him back for this game at full tilt. And of course, we know that the Buccaneers defense hasn't quite been as good as elite against the running back position in fantasy as they've been in weeks past. Vita Vea did get injured at the end of the Washington game, and he is the biggest run defender on this team. 17th in adjusted fantasy points allowed to the running back position are the Tampa Bay Buccaneers on the season. And like I said, they just lost their best run defender, at least for this game, if not for a bit longer. So Saquon, no concerns about starting him. I currently have him at my running back 14 on the week. I think he is absolutely a guy that needs to be in your lineup if you do have him. So if you guys did enjoy that video, as always, leave a like down below, comment any of your thoughts down below as well, and subscribe to the channel if you are new. Peace out, guys, and I'll talk to you soon.